to AI check.
Stories don't change kids. They train attention. Or, as I often say, why the stories we live with matter more than we think. I'm going to open by discussing what stories really do. Most people think that stories exist to entertain us, to pass the time, to distract us, or perhaps to give us something to enjoy. I don't think that's their primary function. Stories don't just entertain us. They train attention. They teach us what to notice, what to ignore, what kinds of decisions feel normal. And that training happens quietly, long before anyone realizes it's happening. And that's why stories matter more than we often admit. Attention, you see, is the real battleground. We talk a lot about values, about beliefs, about behavior, but all of these are downstream from attention. What you pay attention to shapes how you think. How you think shapes what you value, and what you value shapes how you live. Right now, attention is constantly being pulled by notifications, by outrage, by distraction, by endless stimulation. Most people don't realize it's happening, but over time, it trains something subtle. Shorter focus, lower tolerance for discomfort, less patience for complexity. Stories work in the opposite direction. Good stories slow us down. They teach us to sit with tension, to follow cause and effect, to understand consequences. They train attention, not through force, but through participation. Why are kids formed before they decide? Well, let me tell you. One of the biggest mistakes adults make is assuming that formation happens when someone is older, when they can debate, when they can argue, when they can articulate beliefs. But by then, most formation has already happened. Kids don't first learn what to think. They learn what feels normal, what feels admirable, what feels worth risking for. Stories teach that, long before arguments ever do. That's why the question isn't, what message does this story send? Rather, it's, what kind of person does this story train someone to become? That's a much deeper question. Stories teach cost, or they don't. Here's something I pay close attention to. Most modern stories remove cost. The hero gets rewarded quickly. The risk feels temporary, and the consequences are reversible. But real life doesn't work that way. The stories that actually shape people well are the ones that teach cost. That truth has weight. That courage sometimes isn't loud. That loyalty requires sacrifice. When stories remove cost, they train people to expect comfort. And when stories include cost, they train people to endure. That difference matters later, in leadership, in relationships, and in life. Staying human is practical. We hear the phrase staying human a lot. It can sound abstract, but it's actually very practical. Staying human looks like clarity instead of constant reaction, loyalty instead of convenience, self-control instead of impulse. Those traits don't come from lectures. They come from repeated exposure to patterns that honor them. Stories are pattern makers. They quietly ask us, what kind of person do you admire? What kind of choice feels right? And what kind of cost feels acceptable? Over time, those answers settle in. I observe formation happens quietly. Formation rarely announces itself. It doesn't feel dramatic. It doesn't come with milestones. It often happens quietly, in the unseen, through what we give our attention to again and again. That's why stories matter. Not because they tell us what to think, but because they teach us how to think, what to notice, what to value, what to choose when it costs something. And by the time outcomes show up, the training is already complete. Until next time.